They said the dog made a mistake, but some instincts are older than truth itself. The wind moved softly through the pine-lined street, carrying the faint scent of rain and cold asphalt as Caleb Hayes stood beside his truck, one hand resting on Shadow's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's breath like a rhythm he had trusted for years, a rhythm that had once guided him through places where silence meant danger and hesitation meant loss. And even now, miles away from any battlefield, that same quiet awareness lived inside the animal at his side, watching, listening, sensing what others could not. The late afternoon sun stretched low across the neighborhood, painting long shadows over tidy lawns and white fences, a place so ordinary it almost felt unreal to a man who had spent too long in chaos. And yet Caleb had chosen this town for that exact reason, because it was quiet, because it was simple, because nothing unexpected was supposed to happen here. Shadow's ears flicked suddenly, a small movement most would miss, but Caleb noticed, he always did. The dog's posture shifted just slightly, muscles tightening beneath his coat, as if something unseen had brushed against the edge of his awareness. Caleb followed his gaze down the sidewalk where a man approached at an unhurried pace, hands in his jacket pockets, head slightly lowered like any other passerby heading home before dusk. Nothing about him stood out, not his clothes, not his walk, not even the way he avoided eye contact. Just another face in a town full of forgettable moments. But Shadow did not relax. Instead, he leaned forward, nose lifting into the air, drawing in something deeper than scent, something Caleb could never quite name, the kind of signal that didn't belong to the visible world. Easy, Caleb murmured under his breath, more out of instinct than concern, but Shadow did not respond. His amber eyes remained locked, unblinking, tracking the man's every step with a focus that felt almost deliberate, almost knowing. And for the first time in months, Caleb felt that old tension return, a quiet pull beneath his ribs, the kind that whispered something wasn't right, even when everything looked normal. The man passed a mailbox, then a parked sedan, then slowed just slightly as he neared them. And in that brief moment, barely noticeable, Shadow's ears snapped forward and his body stilled completely, as if the world itself had paused with him. Caleb's grip tightened on the leash, not out of fear, but recognition, because he had seen that exact stillness before, not in a backyard, not in a peaceful town, but in places where unseen things mattered more than what stood in plain sight. And though nothing had happened yet, not a sound, not a word, not a single sign anyone else would question, Caleb knew with a certainty he could not explain that whatever Shadow was sensing had already begun. The man slowed just enough to feel deliberate, not hesitant but measured, like someone who understood timing in a way most people never noticed, and Shadow's breathing changed, deeper now, slower, each inhale drawn with purpose as if he were reading something written beneath the surface of the air itself. Caleb felt it too, not as clearly, not as sharply, but as a quiet pressure building behind his thoughts, the kind that had once told him to stop walking down a road that looked perfectly safe, the kind that had no explanation until it did. Stay close, he whispered, though Shadow was already anchored beside him, the leash slack but unnecessary, because this was not obedience, this was awareness. The man's shoes scraped lightly against the pavement as he passed, a small sound, ordinary, forgettable, yet Shadow's head tilted ever so slightly, tracking not the movement, but the rhythm, and then Caleb heard it, faint, almost imagined, a soft ticking that did not belong to footsteps or wind or anything natural to a quiet street in late afternoon. He frowned, glancing around, but no one else reacted. A woman across the road continued watering her lawn. A car rolled by at a steady 30 miles per hour. The world moved forward unaware, and yet Shadow did not move at all. His body held in that same stillness, his gaze locked on the man now a few steps past them. Caleb's pulse slowed instead of quickening. An old habit, because panic never helped. Only observation did. The ticking came again, steady, precise, like something keeping time beneath layers of fabric and intention. The man adjusted his jacket slightly, a casual motion, but Shadow's ears snapped tighter, and a low sound formed in his chest. Not a warning, not fear, but recognition. Caleb stepped forward once, just enough to shift his angle, to see the man's side more clearly, and for a fraction of a second, the light caught something under the coat. Not visible, not obvious, just a subtle irregularity where smooth fabric should have fallen flat. Caleb's breath caught, not from fear, but from understanding forming too quickly to ignore. The man kept walking, unaware or pretending to be. It was impossible to tell, and the ticking continued. Steady as a heartbeat, steady as a countdown. Shadow moved then. Not forward, not aggressive, but deliberate, placing himself slightly ahead of Caleb, positioning without command, as if he already knew where this moment would lead. And Caleb realized something else, something colder. The man had not reacted to the dog at all, not to the stare, not to the presence, not even to the shift in tension that any ordinary person would feel. It was as if he was focused on something else entirely, something internal, something hidden. Caleb's voice lowered, almost a breath. What are you trying to tell me? And Shadow did not look away from the man, because whatever truth was moving through that quiet street, it was no longer waiting to be discovered. It was already unfolding. Caleb did not call out to the man, not yet, because something about the moment demanded silence, the kind of silence that allowed truth to surface without being forced. And Shadow took one slow step forward, then another, his paws landing softly against the pavement, as if even the ground should not be disturbed. The leash slid through Caleb's fingers, but he did not pull it back. He trusted that movement, trusted it the same way he once trusted the quiet signals that had kept him alive when nothing else made sense. The man reached the corner where the street curved gently toward a row of older houses, their paint faded, their windows reflecting the dimming light. And still he did not look back, not once, as if whatever he carried mattered more than anything behind him. The ticking continued, steady, patient, almost calm, and Caleb felt it settle into his awareness like a second heartbeat, one that did not belong to him. "Sir," Caleb finally said, his voice even, controlled, not loud enough to alarm but firm enough to reach. The man paused then, just slightly, his shoulders tightening beneath the coat before he turned halfway, not fully facing them, just enough to acknowledge the sound. His expression was neutral, almost distant, like someone interrupted from a thought that mattered more than the present moment. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice polite but thin, stretched in a way Caleb could not quite place. Shadow stopped moving but did not relax, his body aligned between Caleb and the man now, a quiet barrier, a living line drawn across the space. Caleb studied him more closely, the way his jacket hung unevenly, the faint stiffness in how he held his left side, the absence of any real curiosity in his eyes, and beneath it all, that ticking, still precise, still unbroken. "You passing through?" Caleb asked, keeping his tone casual, the kind of question neighbors asked each other without thought. But this was not without thought. Every word measured, every second counted. The man hesitated, not long, but enough, just visiting. He replied, and for the first time, his gaze flickered downward, not toward Caleb, not toward Shadow, but toward his own coat, just a fraction, just a reflex. And that was when Shadow let out a single low breath, not a growl, not a warning, but something deeper, something that sounded almost like certainty. Caleb felt it then, the shift, the invisible line crossing from uncertainty into knowing. The man's hand moved slightly inside his pocket, not quickly, not threatening, but deliberate, as if preparing for something only he understood, and Shadow stepped forward again, placing himself directly in the man's path, unmoving, unyielding, his eyes locked with a focus that felt older than training, older than commands, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to narrow to that single point between them, the quiet street, the fading light, the distant hum of a passing car, all of it falling away as Caleb realized that whatever Shadow had sensed from the beginning was no longer hidden. It was here, present, unfolding in real time, and the truth, whatever it was, had already chosen this moment to reveal itself. The man did not step back, not immediately, but there was a shift in him, subtle yet undeniable, like a rhythm thrown slightly off time, and for the first time his composure seemed to flicker, not in panic, not in fear, but in calculation, as if he were measuring something invisible, weighing seconds against distance, choices against consequences. Shadow remained still, his presence quiet but absolute, his body forming a line the man did not cross. And Caleb felt that same stillness settle into his own posture, shoulders relaxed, breath even, the way he had learned long ago that control did not come from force, but from understanding the moment before it broke. The ticking continued, steady and patient, echoing faintly between them like a secret no one else could hear. A woman down the street laughed softly at something on her phone. A sprinkler clicked on, sending a fine mist into the air. The world remained unaware, untouched by what stood here now. And yet Caleb knew that whatever this was, it did not belong to ordinary life. "You are not just visiting," Caleb said quietly, not a question, but a statement shaped by instinct rather than proof. The man's eyes lifted then, meeting Caleb's fully for the first time. And there was something there, not anger, not guilt, but a kind of distance, as if he had already stepped away from the version of himself that could explain anything. "I said I was passing through," he replied, but the words lacked weight, like they had been practiced without meaning. Shadow's ears tilted forward again, catching something deeper, something beneath the surface of voice and movement. And then Caleb noticed it, not with his eyes, but with that same quiet awareness that had begun to grow inside him. The ticking was not random, it was measured, consistent, intentional, and beneath it, barely perceptible, was another layer, a faint vibration that did not belong to clothing or breath, something structured, something designed. Caleb's gaze lowered briefly to the man's coat, not staring, not obvious, just enough to confirm what his instincts were already forming. And in that instant, the air seemed to tighten, not physically, but in the way moments do when they begin to matter. The man shifted his weight slightly, his hand still inside his pocket, and for a fraction of a second, his eyes flicked past Shadow, scanning the space beyond, as if calculating a path forward, but Shadow adjusted instantly, stepping half a pace to mirror the movement, closing that invisible gap without aggression, without sound, just presence. Caleb exhaled slowly, grounding himself in the rhythm of the moment. "Whatever you are carrying," he said, his voice steady, almost calm enough to be mistaken for casual, "it is not just yours anymore." The words hung between them, not as a threat, but as recognition, and for the first time, the man hesitated in a way that felt real, not calculated, not controlled, but uncertain. The ticking continued, unchanged, but now it felt louder, closer, as if time itself had stepped forward into the space they shared. And Shadow did not look away, because whatever truth had brought them to this exact place on this quiet street, it had already chosen him to be the one who saw it first. The hesitation lingered longer this time, stretching thin across the space between them like something fragile that could not hold much weight. And Caleb saw it clearly now, not just in the man's eyes, but in the way his shoulders no longer carried that quiet certainty from before. Something inside him had shifted, something small but undeniable, and Shadow felt it too, his stance steady but no longer advancing, as if the dog understood that the moment had reached a threshold where force was no longer needed, only truth. The ticking continued, but now Caleb noticed a change, not in its rhythm, but in its presence. It felt closer, sharper, like it had stepped out from hiding and into the open, and beneath it, that faint vibration pulsed again, steady, structured, almost mechanical in a way that did not belong to anything natural. Caleb's mind moved quickly but calmly, connecting pieces that had no business fitting together in a quiet neighborhood on an ordinary afternoon. "You can still stop," he said, his voice low, not demanding, not accusing, just offering something the man had not expected to hear. And for a moment, the man's expression softened, not fully, but enough to reveal something human beneath the distance, something tired, something burdened. His gaze dropped again, this time not out of reflex, but intention, and Caleb followed it, just slightly, enough to see the outline beneath the coat more clearly now, not distinct, not obvious, but present, a shape that did not belong to the natural lines of a body, and the ticking aligned with it, as if the sound itself were anchored to that hidden weight. The man exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed heavier than the moment required, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a quiet strain. "You do not understand," he said, not defensive, not angry, just certain, and Caleb nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. because he understood more than the man realized. Not the specifics, not the details, but the feeling, the point where choices narrowed and time became something you could no longer ignore. Shadow shifted slightly then, not forward, not back, but closer to Caleb's side. His presence no longer a barrier, but a support, a silent reminder that whatever came next, they would face it together. The man's hand moved slowly from his pocket, not revealing anything, just resting against the outside of his coat, as if feeling the shape beneath it. And for a brief second, his eyes met Caleb's again, and in that glance, something passed between them. Not words, not explanation, but recognition, the kind that exists when two people stand on opposite sides of a moment that cannot be undone. The ticking continued, steady as ever, but now it felt louder, not because it had changed, but because Caleb was listening fully, not just with his ears, but with everything he had learned to trust. "It does not have to end the way you think," Caleb said quietly, and the words did not carry authority. They carried possibility, and that was something the man had not expected, something that made him pause in a way that no threat could have achieved. The wind shifted gently down the street, carrying the scent of distant rain, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, balanced on the edge of a choice that had not yet been made. And Shadow remained still, watching, waiting, because sometimes the truth does not reveal itself through action, but through the moment someone finally decides to listen. The silence stretched, not empty but full, like the pause between two breaths that both men knew could not last forever. And Caleb held his ground without moving closer, without pushing, because something in the man's eyes had begun to change, not completely, not yet, but enough to suggest that whatever decision was forming inside him was no longer locked in place. Shadow's posture softened by a fraction, not relaxed, not careless, but attentive in a different way now, as if the urgency had shifted from stopping something to witnessing something unfold. The ticking remained steady, but it no longer felt like a threat rushing forward. It felt like a measure, a clock marking the final seconds of uncertainty. The man's shoulders lowered slightly, and for the first time since he had appeared on that quiet street, he seemed aware of the world around him, his gaze drifting past Caleb, past Shadow, to the houses, the open windows, the quiet lives continuing without knowledge of how close they stood to something unseen. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came at first, only a slow breath that carried more weight than anything he had said before. "I was not supposed to stop here," he said finally, his voice quieter now, less certain, like someone stepping off a path they had followed for too long. Caleb listened without interrupting, because sometimes understanding came not from asking, but from allowing space. The man's hand remained pressed against his coat, fingers slightly curled as if holding something in place, and the ticking aligned with that touch. Steady, patient, waiting. It was simple, the man continued, his eyes no longer fixed on Caleb, but somewhere distant, somewhere internal. "I just had to keep moving." And there it was, the truth beneath the surface, not in details, not in explanations, but in the way he spoke, in the way the words carried a quiet exhaustion that no ordinary errand could explain. Shadow shifted again, stepping closer to Caleb's side until his shoulder brushed lightly against his leg, grounding him, reminding him that this moment, fragile as it was, still held direction, still held choice. Caleb nodded once, slowly, then "Stop now," he said, and the words were not forceful, not commanding. They were steady, offered like a hand extended across a distance that could still be crossed. The man's eyes closed briefly, just a second, but in that second something changed, something released, and when he opened them again, the tension that had held him upright seemed to ease, not disappear, but loosen, enough for him to take a small step back, not away in escape, but away from the path he had been following. The ticking continued, unchanged, but its meaning had shifted, no longer a countdown towards something inevitable, but a reminder that time still existed, that choices still mattered. The wind moved again through the trees, softer now, carrying the faint scent of rain that had not yet arrived, and the man exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something he had been holding far longer than he should have. "I did not think anyone would notice," he said, almost to himself, and Caleb glanced down at Shadow, whose gaze remained steady, unwavering, because he had noticed, Long before words, long before understanding, he had seen what others could not. And perhaps that was the quiet truth of it all, that sometimes the ones who cannot explain what they see are the ones who see it most clearly. The man stood there as if the ground beneath him had changed, not physically, but in a way only he could feel. And for a moment the quiet street seemed to breathe around them, holding its distance, giving space to something that did not belong to noise or urgency, but to decision, real decision, the kind that reshapes everything that follows. Caleb did not move, not because he could not, but because he understood that this moment did not need action. It needed presence, steady and unbroken. Shadow remained at his side, no longer a barrier, no longer a warning, but something else entirely, a witness, his amber eyes fixed not with tension now, but with a calm that felt almost knowing, as if he had seen this moment long before it arrived. The ticking continued, but it no longer pressed forward, it lingered, each second falling into place like footsteps slowing instead of running. The man's hand trembled slightly against his coat, not with fear, but with the weight of what he carried. And when he spoke again, his voice carried something different, something quieter, something closer to truth. "I thought if I kept walking, it would not matter," he said, his gaze drifting toward the far end of the street where the light had begun to fade into soft gold. "I thought distance could change what was already set." Caleb listened, not interrupting, because he knew that once someone reached this point, words were no longer something you pulled from them. They were something that surfaced on their own. The man swallowed slowly, his breath uneven now, no longer measured, no longer controlled. But he knew. He added, almost as if the realization had just formed in that very second, his eyes shifting down toward Shadow. And for the first time, there was something like recognition there, not of the dog as an animal, but as something more, something that had seen him before he could hide, something that had refused to look away. Shadow did not move, did not react, because he did not need to. The truth had already found its place. Caleb exhaled quietly, feeling the shift settle into his chest. Not relief, not yet, but something close to it. "Then do not keep walking," he said, and the words were simple, almost gentle, but they carried a weight that matched the moment. The man closed his eyes again, longer this time, and when he opened them, the distance that had lived there before was gone, replaced by something more grounded, more present, as if he had finally stepped back into himself after being somewhere else for too long. The ticking continued, steady as ever, but now it felt different, not like a countdown, not like a threat, but like time returning to something natural, something that could still be changed. The man's hand slowly moved away from his coat, not revealing anything, not yet, but no longer holding on to it the same way, no longer guarding it as if it defined him. And Caleb saw it clearly then, not with his eyes, but with that quiet understanding that had guided him from the beginning. This was never about stopping a moment. It was about reaching the person inside it before it was too late. The wind moved gently through the trees again, softer now, carrying with it the faint promise of rain that had not yet fallen. And Shadow finally shifted his gaze, just slightly, not away from the man, but toward Caleb, as if to say the same thing he had always said without words, that sometimes the truth does not arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, waiting for someone willing to stand still long enough to hear it. The man's hand lowered slowly to his side, no longer guarding what lay beneath his coat, and for the first time the tension that had wrapped around him like an invisible weight seemed to loosen, not completely, but enough to allow something else to take its place, something quieter, something more human. Caleb watched carefully, not with suspicion, but with the kind of attention that comes from understanding how fragile a turning point can be. Shadow remained still, his presence calm and unwavering, as if the dog already knew the direction this moment had chosen. The ticking continued, steady and unchanged, but it no longer filled the space with urgency. It simply existed, a reminder of what had been and what could still be altered. The man drew in a long breath, deeper than before, as though he had finally allowed himself to feel the air around him. The street, the trees, the distant hum of a passing car. All the ordinary things that had been there all along but had not reached him until now. "I never meant for it to come this far," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that did not need explanation. Caleb nodded once, not in judgment, but in acknowledgement, Because intentions often arrive long before consequences do, and not always in the same shape. The man's eyes drifted toward the houses again, the windows glowing faintly with the warmth of evening settling in, lives continuing, unaware, untouched. And something in that simple scene seemed to reach him in a way nothing else had. His shoulders lowered further, the rigid line of his posture softening into something that resembled acceptance. "I thought I had time," he added, almost to himself, and the ticking, still steady, seemed to echo those words in a way that felt both distant and immediate. Caleb stepped forward then, just one small step, careful, measured, not closing the space completely, but enough to show he was there, that he was not stepping away. "You still do," he said, and the words carried no urgency, only truth, the kind that does not force itself but waits to be chosen. The man looked at him again, really looked this time, and whatever distance had once filled his eyes was gone, replaced by something clearer, something present, something willing. His hand lifted slowly, not in defense, not in hesitation, but with intention, fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of his coat before pausing, as if asking permission from himself, and then he exhaled, a quiet release that seemed to carry the last of the weight he had been holding. The ticking continued, but now it felt like something else entirely, not a measure of what was about to happen, but a measure of what had been avoided. Shadow shifted slightly, his posture easing for the first time since the moment began, not because the situation had disappeared, but because the truth had settled into place, calm and undeniable. The man's voice came again, softer now, steadier. "I did not think anyone would see it," he said, and Caleb glanced down at Shadow, whose gaze remained fixed, not tense, not questioning, just present, because he had seen it, from the very beginning, without doubt, without hesitation. And perhaps that was the quiet miracle of it all, that sometimes it is not strength or force that changes a moment, but the simple act of being seen before it is too late. The man stood in the quiet that followed his own decision, not as someone cornered, not as someone defeated, but as someone who had finally stopped running from something that had been walking beside him all along. And Caleb could see it now. The difference was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but it was there, in the way the man held himself, in the way his breathing had slowed, in the way his eyes no longer searched for an exit but instead rested in the present moment. Shadow remained close, his body no longer tense, his presence steady and calm, as if the work he had come to do was complete. The ticking continued, but it had changed in meaning, no longer a signal of urgency, no longer something hidden beneath layers of intention. It was simply sound now, something that existed but no longer controlled what came next. The man slowly opened his coat, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to reveal what had been concealed. And though Caleb did not step closer, did not reach out, he understood in that instant that the truth had already done what it needed to do. The man exhaled again, softer this time, as if releasing the last of a burden that had never truly belonged to him alone. "I thought no one would notice in time," he said quietly, his voice no longer distant, no longer guarded, but grounded in something real. Caleb nodded once, not because he needed to agree, but because he understood the weight behind those words, understood how easy it was for someone to believe they could carry something alone until it was too late. The street remained unchanged, the houses still, the faint glow of evening settling in, life continuing without interruption. And yet for those few moments, something unseen had shifted, something had been held back from crossing into a place it could not return from. Shadow stepped forward slightly, not toward the man, but beside Caleb, his head lifting just enough to catch the fading light. His ears relaxed, his posture at ease, and Caleb reached down, resting his hand gently against the dog's neck, feeling the quiet strength there, the same strength that had guided them both without explanation, without hesitation. The man looked at them both, his gaze lingering not in fear, not in confusion, but in something closer to gratitude, though he did not say the word. It was there, in the stillness, in the absence of what might have been. The ticking slowed in Caleb's awareness until it became just another sound among many, blending into the background of a world that had almost missed what had just happened. And as the man turned slightly, no longer to leave in the same way he had intended before, but to step into something uncertain yet different. Caleb remained where he was, not needing to follow, not needing to speak, because some moments do not require closure. They require understanding. And Shadow, who had seen it all before anyone else, stood quietly at his side, his gaze drifting once more across the street as if listening to something deeper than sound, something that moved beneath the surface of ordinary life. And perhaps that was the quiet truth that lingered long after the moment had passed, that sometimes the world is changed not by what happens, but by what is gently stopped before it ever has the chance to begin.